What's up guys, we're back with another EDH gameplay video, and before we jump into this video, I would just like to remind you that we have a couple sub goals that we're trying to get to, so if you could like, comment, and subscribe, that would really help us out. And with all that said, let's get straight into the gameplay. This week, Ron is piloting Ghired Conclave Exile. He opened with a Selesnya Eulogist, Eternal Witness, Plains, Forest, Wooded Foothills, a Hanweir Battlements, and a Determined Iterations. Jordan is piloting Adeline, Resplendent Cathar. He opened with Angels of Tyr, Spirit of the Labyrinth, Path to Exile, Mindstone, Skull Clamp, Flooded Strand, and a Plains. This week, Nash is piloting Shorikai Genesis Engine. He opened with a Generous Gift Cyclonic Rift, Teferi's Protection, a Pathway, an Island, his Painland, and a Tangoland. And Ryan is piloting Obeka, Brute Chronologist. He opened with Careful Study, Limdul's Vault, Mystic Remora, Rhystic Study, Arcane Signet, Chromox, and a Prismatic Vista. Ron starts his turn off with a Hanweir Battlements, tapping it to play Soul Ring. Jordan starts his turn off by playing a Flooded Strands, which he immediately cracks for a Plains. He then uses that Plains to make white mana in order to cast Skull Clamp. Nash starts his turn off by playing a Tangoland. Ryan starts things off with a Prismatic Vista, which he cracks in order to get an Island. He then plays a Chromox, imprinting his Limdul's Vault. He taps both them in order to cast an Arcane Signet. He then taps the Arcane Signet in order to play Mystic Remora. Ron starts his turn off by playing a Forest. He then casts a Nature's Lord, not paying the 4, giving Ryan a draw. Ron then gets a Triome into play. Jordan starts his turn off by playing a Plains. He then taps out in order to cast his Spirit of the Labyrinth. Nash plays an Island and passes the turn. On Ryan's upkeep, he pays the Remora. On Ryan's main phase, he plays a Swamp as land for turn and casts his Rhystic Study. On Ron's turn, he plays a Wooded Foothill and then grabs Stomping Ground, shocking it into play. Ron then taps out in order to cast his commander, paying for the Rhystic Study. On ETB, his commander makes a Rhino token. Jordan starts his turn off with a Plains and then follows suit, casting his commander, not paying the Rhystic Study. He then moves to combat and attacks Ryan with the Spirit of the Labyrinth, causing a trigger on his commander to make 2 tokens, attacking both Nash and Ron. On Nash's turn, he plays an Adakar Waste, following this up with a Min Wily Illusionist. He does not pay the Rhystic, and thus Ryan draws a card. On Ryan's upkeep, he lets the Mystic Remora die. Then, on his main phase, he plays a Wooded Foothills as land for turn, cracking it, getting his Volcanic Island into play. He then taps 4 and casts Obeka, Brute Chronologist. On Ron's turn, he plays a Plains as his land for turn, and then casts a Selesnya Eulogist, paying the Rhystic. He then casts Determined Iterations, also paying the Rhystic. Ron then moves to combat, and his Iterations triggers, making a Rhino with haste. He then declares attacks and attacks Jordan with 2 Rhinos and Nash with his commander, causing an attack trigger. He then populates, making another Rhino, attacking Ryan. Once everything is said and done, Nash blocks Ron's commander, and Jordan takes 8 damage and Ryan takes 4 damage. Jordan starts his turn off by playing a Waste as his land for turn. He then moves to combat and attacks Ron with both his commander and 2 warriors. His commander then triggers, creating 1 warrior for each opponent. Ron, Ryan, and Nash each block 1 warrior, and then Ron takes 9 damage. Then on second main phase, he plays a Mindstone, paying the 1 for Rhystic. On Nash's turn, he plays an Urza Saga as land for turn, and then casts Smothering Tithe, not paying for the Rhystic, letting Ryan draw a card. On Ryan's turn, he does not pay for the Smothering Tithe, giving Nash a treasure. He then plays Windswept Heath, cracking it to get Underground Sea. He proceeds to cast his Imperial Seal. He then passes the turn. On Ron's turn, he does not pay for the Smothering Tithe, giving Nash another treasure. He then plays Ancient Tomb as land for turn, and follows this up with Court of Calling. X6, not paying for the Rhystic Study, giving Ryan a draw. Ryan does pay the 2 for the Smothering Tithe. The Court of Calling puts Aurelia, the War Leader, into play. On Ron's combat step, his Determined Iterations triggers, making a Rhino. He then declares attacks with Aurelia at Jordan, his commander, and 1 Rhino at Nash, which causes a Populate trigger on his commander, making another Rhino, and 3 Rhinos on Ryan. Nash declares blocks on the commander, and after that, Ryan takes 12 and Nash takes 4. Ron then untaps and moves to his second combat step, causing another trigger on his Iterations, making yet another Rhino. He then declares attacks with Aurelia and his commander at Nash, and 2 of his Rhino tokens at Nash. He then gets a trigger on his commander to make another Rhino tapped and attacking, causing 3 Rhinos to be attacking Ryan. When all is said and done, Ryan goes down to 5 life, and Nash takes 12. On Ron's end step, Jordan Path to Exiles the Aurelia. Ron gets a mountain into play. On Jordan's turn, he draws and does not pay for the Smothering Tithe. Jordan then clamps his Spirit of the Labyrinth, drawing 2 cards and not paying for either, giving Nash 2 more treasures. After Nash's draw step, his Urza Saga gets another counter. He then plays a Pathway and casts a Mind Stone. He proceeds to pass the turn. Ryan decides not to pay for Smothering Tithe, letting Nash get a treasure. He then casts a Careful Study, drawing 2, not paying for either. The Careful Study causes Ryan to discard 2 cards, being Force of Negation and a Yawgmoth's Will. Ryan follows this up by casting Demonic Tutor. He then casts his Dockside Extortionist, creating 13 treasures on the ETB. He uses 6 to cast his commander, then 2 more to play his Isochron Scepter, imprinting a Final Fortune. He then pays 2 to cast a copy of Final Fortune and takes an extra turn. And on EOT, Nash bounces Ryan's commander. Ryan moves to his extra turn, fails to draw a haste enabler, and loses the game to the end of turn trigger on Final Fortune. On Ron's turn, he draws and does not pay for the Smothering Tithe. He then moves to combat and gets a Iterations trigger, making a Rhino. He then attacks with Ghired and 4 Rhinos, getting a Populate trigger, making a 5th attacking Rhino. Once all of combat has resolved, Nash takes 8 and Jordan takes 2 with no blockers declared. On second main phase, Ron plays his Eternal Witness, getting back his Court of Calling. He then follows this up with a Farseek. The Farseek gets a Temple Garden into play, and Ron passes. On Jordan's turn, he draws, does not pay for the Smothering Tithe, and moves to main phase, playing Cathar Crusade and moving to combat. He then attacks, causing a trigger on his commander, making 2 tokens, causing 2 triggers on Cathar Crusade, giving everything +2/2. Ron double blocks Jordan's commander and takes 3 from the token, as does Nash. On EOT, Nash makes a construct using his Urza Saga. He then moves to his turn, and after the draw, in response to the trigger to put an extra Saga counter on the Urza Saga, he creates another construct. He then gets a Soul Ring off the Saga trigger and casts his commander. On Ron's turn, he plays a Court of Calling X5, but Nash responds by casting Fierce Guardianship to counter it. Ron then moves to combat, where his Iterations triggers, making a Rhino. He then swings 5 Rhinos at Jordan and Ghired at Nash, getting a Populate trigger. Nash blocks Ghired. Jordan blocks 3 of the Rhinos and goes down to 4 life. On Jordan's turn, he draws a card, does not pay for the Smothering Tithe, and then casts Blind Obedience. Nash responds by activating his commander to draw 2, discard 1, and create a pilot. Jordan then follows this up by casting and extorting his Teferi's Protection. On Nash's turn, he starts things off by playing a tapped Hollowed Fountain. He then casts a Proteus Staff and passes the turn. On Ron's turn, he draws and pays the 2. He then casts Elemental Bond. He then casts Triumph of the Hordes and moves to combat. He has a Iterations trigger, creating a tapped Rhino. He then declares attacks with 4 Rhinos and Ghired, getting a Populate trigger, making a 5th attacking Rhino. Nash responds by activating Proteus Staff. He hits a Sun Titan, getting back his Urza's Saga. Nash then casts Tefprot, phasing out. On Jordan's turn, he draws, does not pay for the Smothering Tithe, and then he casts a Heliod's Intervention X4, hitting both the constructs, Proteus Staff, and the Urza Saga. Nash responds by using Proteus Staff on one of his pilots, getting a Kelpie Guide. The Heliod's then resolves, destroying all 4 permanents. On Nash's turn, he attacks Ron with his Sun Titan, getting back his Proteus Staff. On Ron's turn, he plays a Flame Shadow Conjuring. He then casts Bramble Sovereign and pays a red to make a copy, drawing him 2 cards. He follows this up by moving to combat, getting an Iterations trigger, drawing him another card. He then passes the turn. Jordan starts his turn off by playing Iganjo, Seat of the Empire, then casting and extorting a Aura of Silence, and then following up with Thalia, Heroic Cathar. On EOT, Nash activates his commander, drawing 2, discarding 1, and creating a pilot. He then follows this up by overloading a Cyclonic Rift. Seeing that Nash had more than enough to lethal both players concede and start picking up.